After what has been happening during the last few weeks, we have to ask ourselves the question, are Boeing having a culture problem?
We're going to approach this, number one, acknowledging our mistake.
Now, that question cannot be answered without, of course, also asking the same question about one of their main suppliers, Spirit AeroSystems. And in this video, we will try to answer that, and we will also have a look at what role those issues might have played in the recent Alaska 737 MAX-9 blowout, as well as the production of Boeing 737s in general. Stay tuned. If you're watching this, then I'm sure you already know the story about the Alaska Airlines flight that suddenly lost a plug door on their left-hand side during their climb out a few weeks back. But if somehow you haven't heard of this, well, then I've done another video about everything that we knew so far about that flight 1282, or at least what we knew during the first week or so. There might be more info about it now. The official investigation into that incident is anyway still ongoing, and we will probably get an interim report from the NTSB about it relatively soon. We're hoping that this report will contain the timeline of the key events, as well as a description of the areas that the investigation will look closer into before issuing a final report. Now, the NTSB will be investigating both the technical side of what happened, as well as more procedural matters like who did what and when and why, and eventually we will get a full picture of exactly what caused that door to suddenly depart the aircraft. Meanwhile, the FAA is doing its own investigation, or investigations. They are actually looking more closely into Boeing and its suppliers to determine more generally who does what and when, as they work together to assemble new aircraft, and this is obviously to find out where any mistakes might have been made. FAA started their work after the incident by grounding all 737 MAX-9s who had those mid-cabin door plugs, and they then launched a closer investigation into the production of the 737 MAX-9 and also increased their overall oversight of Boeing's production. And then, on Wednesday the 17th of January, the FAA also announced that they will review data from 40 inspections of in-service 737 MAX-9s, where airlines operating those jets performed these inspections based on initial guidance from Boeing. Now, after they have reviewed that data, the FAA will then approve a definitive inspection and maintenance process to return these jets back to service. And hopefully, by the time that you're watching this video, this will have already happened.
The FAA has cleared a path for MAX-9 jets to return to service.
Now, when they were explaining how they were going to do this procedure, the FAA also went into a bit more detail, saying explicitly that they were going to investigate not just what was going on with the 737 MAX-9, but more broadly, Boeing's manufacturing practices and production lines, including those involving subcontractor Spirit AeroSystems. Now, all this obviously fueled quite a bit of speculation in the media and online, and basically what everyone would like to know is, did someone simply just forget to install those 4 bolts that kept this door plug locked to the frame? And on that note, who was the one that last removed or reinstalled those mid-cabin door plugs? Was it Boeing, Spirit AeroSystems, or could it even have been someone else involved here? There has been a lot of speculation that another company may have interfered with the mid-cabin door plug when they worked on the plane's satellite antenna. You know, the one that's on top of the fuselage and provides Wi-Fi to passengers. The company who did this work, AAR Corp, has released a statement confirming that they did indeed work on this aircraft to modify that antenna late in November or early December, but they denied working on or near any mid-cabin exit door plug. Now, of course, you can never say never, I guess, but honestly, given the absolute blasting that Boeing has faced since this happened, you can be absolutely sure that if a third-party company messed with this door, Boeing would have let us know in order to turn down the heat a little bit to themselves, but they haven't said a peep about that so far. But what we do know is that it is Spirit AeroSystems that makes these mid-cabin door plugs along with the entire fuselage of all variants of the Boeing 737. Initially, there were reports suggesting that Spirit was installing these doors only temporarily and that Boeing's technicians then removed them and made the final installation later at the final assembly line. But later reports clarified that Boeing doesn't work on these door plugs unless an inspection during further assembly reveals that there is something wrong with the door or that the aircraft fails a pressurization test before delivery. Now, crucially, in a recent interview, Boeing's CEO Dave Calhoun said that this is a failure that escaped Spirit's factory. But, of course, it then must have also escaped Boeing's factory, which is something that I'm sure that we'll hear more about from the FAA and the NTSB. In any case, both Calhoun's statement and the fact that the FAA is investigating Boeing and Spirit is likely showing us where the problem lies here. But the billion-dollar question, of course, is this simply a one-off, or does this actually point to something more serious? Well, unfortunately, this is not the first time we're seeing possible production problems with the Boeing 737. Only a few months ago, I made a video about two other issues that affected the 737 production during 2023 that we already knew about. Both of these issues were in the rear section of the aircraft, and the first one, we heard about at least, involved some non-conforming bolts with bolt fittings connecting the vertical tail fin to the fuselage. And then, just a few months later, we also learned of a second issue, this time involving misdrilled holes for rivets in the rear pressure bulkhead of the aircraft. Both of these issues were later fixed, but doing that was extremely costly and led to significant aircraft delivery delays. Now, it is not uncommon to have production issues in relatively new aircraft designs, or even in older designs after a big production change, like a move of the production or assembly site, for example. But that's not the case for the Boeing 737, since it is obviously far from new. It is basically as mature and well understood as any airliner could possibly be, and for nearly its entire history, it has been assembled in the same place, Renton in Washington State. Well, Boeing did actually once assemble it at Boeing Field, a few miles away from Renton, but only for the first 2 to 3 years of production, and that was back in the 1960s. The fuselage of the 737 has always been made in Wichita, Kansas, where Spirit is based today, but as I explained in my previous video, that production site used to be called Boeing Wichita all the way up until 2005. It was then that Boeing decided to sell off that facility along with some of its other production as well.
Folks in Wichita say Boeing double-crossed them when it suddenly announced plans to shut down the factory.
Now, the 737 is Boeing's biggest seller and its main source of revenue. So why did Boeing sell off the production of the 737 fuselage, and what did this sale symbolize for the culture of Boeing and what is now Spirit AeroSystems? The Alaska Airlines blowout is a stark reminder of the weaknesses that might still exist within the airline industry. And just like we always strive to try to improve on that safety, I think that our own online privacy deserves that same level of attention. Did you know, for example, that there is an entire industry out there known as data brokers, whose business idea is to collect personal information about you and your family and then selling it off to the highest bidders? Now, luckily, today's sponsor Incognit is a service created to deal with this exact problem by reaching out to all of these companies and demand the removal of your information, something that they then have to comply with by law. With Incognit's yearly subscription, your data privacy is not just protected, it's actively monitored, updated and shielded for as long as you stay with them. I have been following the removal of my data from the Incognit dashboard, and it started off with 51 requests but have now increased to 65, and the result of my email inbox is very noticeable. I get way less spam and irritating unsolicited emails by now. So if you want to start to remove your personal information from these players, then click on the link here below, which is incognit.com/mentor now. That will give you an exclusive discount of 60% off the annual Incognit plan. Thank you, Incognit. Now back to the video. The idea behind Boeing's sale of many of its operations in the early to mid-2000s had to do with a strategic decision to divest of what its management decided as non-core operations. Now, the fact that they thought making fuselages was not part of their core operation might maybe come as a bit of a surprise to you, but basically Boeing's management believed that the company's core activity was actually the assembly and integration of complex structures and systems into aircraft, not the actual manufacture of aircraft parts and structures. Now, if you guessed that this reasoning had a lot or basically everything to do with Boeing's merger with McDonnell Douglas in the late 1990s, you are absolutely correct. The business idea here was that a company should basically stick to what it is good at and then sell off any underperforming assets. Then the new owners of those assets could manage them more freely, looking for new customers and activities, expanding or even improving themselves. The basics behind this general idea, which I'm of course oversimplifying quite a lot here, is called Return on Net Assets, or RONA. As a principle, it has quite a few fans inside of business circles, but even on Wall Street there were quite a few people who thought that Boeing was going a bit too far when they sold it off to Spirit. Now, there might be more to this. Remember, this sale happened already back in 2005, where a lot of people at Boeing thought that maybe the 737's days were already numbered, but that's debatable. Now, to be fair here, Spirit AeroSystems did actually grow as an independent company after Boeing let it loose. After the split, Spirit acquired a number of other smaller aerostructure companies in the United States, in Malaysia, France, England, Scotland, and even in Northern Ireland. To give you an idea of what they do now, Spirit's Northern Ireland site is currently making the wings for the Airbus A220, and on top of that, Spirit is also making fuselage parts for the Airbus A350 and several smaller parts for nearly all other Airbus aircraft. The company also makes various parts for Bombardier business jets, and they were also for a few years making the wings for a number of Gulfstream jets. Arguably, a lot of these ventures wouldn't have worked out if Spirit was an integral part of Boeing, so the McDonnell Douglas business model seemed to initially have worked out, or at least for a while. But it should also be plainly said here that Spirit is still, in practice, an integral part of Boeing. Boeing is by a huge margin their biggest customer, and after the split, Spirit continued to make the same stuff for Boeing as previously the Boeing Wichita site had always done. Besides the 737 fuselage, Spirit AeroSystems also makes the forward fuselage of the composite 787 as well as the nose sections of all other Boeings, plus many more smaller components. This means that Boeing represented 65% of Spirit's revenue in 2022, with Airbus as a distant second at 27%. So, despite its efforts to expand, Boeing is basically 2/3 of Spirit's business, nearly 20 years after it was made into a separate company. But something that has changed over this time is that Spirit's employees and management gradually stopped having any perceived or even real loyalties to Boeing. And in many people's eyes, Boeing actually hasn't been very good at looking after the company's now #1 supplier. John Ostrower in The Air Current, which you, by the way, should definitely check out, wrote an article a few months back detailing the strange relationship between Boeing and Spirit, and in it he explained how Boeing would sometimes withhold payments to Spirit at various times. This matter eventually got so serious that Spirit actually sued Boeing back in 2018, and even though that affair mostly remained behind closed doors, it went on for several months before being resolved. And it's worth knowing that Boeing reportedly also had similar aggressive pricing attitudes with some of their other suppliers. Now, all of this has led to suggestions that Boeing was sharing their business risks with their suppliers but keeping all of the rewards to themselves. Now, having said that, some more information has actually recently emerged, clarifying why Boeing was withholding at least some of those payments from Spirit, and it turns out that it had to do with what Boeing and Spirit called escapements. These are production faults that made it out or escaped from the factory, and it appears that Boeing would penalize Spirit for these type of faults, while still insisting on Spirit maintaining a very high delivery rate. So, I think now we might be getting closer to the real problem here. Spirit currently faces a class action lawsuit from former investors, which gives a lot of insight into the atmosphere that this situation created within Spirit. Now, to be clear, since what I will be telling you now forms part of a lawsuit, we're definitely only hearing one side of the story here. But the witnesses that this suit largely relies on are 3 former Spirit employees. And their testimony suggests that Spirit's management was not devoted to a zero defects culture as they claimed that they were. The suit also suggests that Spirit's management knew of at least one of those 737 production issues that I mentioned before, and that they kept it a secret from everyone, even Spirit's investors and Boeing. Remember that first 737 production defect, the fitting of the vertical tail fin we got to know about in April 2023? Well, the second issue about the misdrilled holes in the aft pressure bulkhead didn't get publicized until Boeing discovered it themselves in August that same year. But the class action suit alleges that a Spirit employee had actually discovered the issue with those misdrilled holes a full 10 months earlier in October 2022, and he had then informed several of his superiors about it both verbally and in writing.
I've lost faith on the quality organization here at Spirit, and this is my last cry for help into resolving this issue that violates the guidelines established by the AS9000, 100, which governs our certification to build aircraft and which has been in question and even put on probation by Boeing.
Boeing apparently then discovered that drilling issue by chance whilst they were fixing that other issue, the one about the vertical tail fin fittings, and crucially here, it appears that Spirit's own CEO later admitted that they had indeed known but hadn't said anything to anyone. In an interview in September of 2023, Tom Gentile III, CEO of Spirit AeroSystems at the time, admitted to knowing about the misdrilled bulkhead holes before Boeing discovered it. He said that Spirit had been working on a solution to that defect when the escape was ultimately found by Boeing. The Spirit board replaced Gentile as CEO 3 weeks after he made this admission, and the Spirit employee who had found the hole issue in October of 2022, a product and process verification core quality auditor, was initially moved to a different position, and he was later then fired, in his view unfairly, because he hadn't also identified that other fault, the one involving the vertical tail fin fittings. Now, he argued that he couldn't have discovered that issue because he had a deadline to meet regarding the analysis of that rear pressure bulkhead problem, and that he had focused most of his effort on that one. Now again, this is a class action lawsuit which has already been amended several times, and this is just one side of it, so we won't really know where it leads yet. But anyway, 2 other witnesses in this same suit, who are also former Spirit employees in quality control roles but had left the company on their own accord, they stated that they routinely found defects on the 737 parts that they were about to be shipping out to Boeing. These alleged defects included foreign object debris or FOD, missing fasteners, peeling paint and poor skin quality, and on top of that they also noted that other issues like other misdrilled holes and miscalibrated torque wrenches who were being used on the production. One of these employees also recounted that his Spirit superiors asked him to change his method of recording defects in order for the number of recorded defects to be smaller. When he expressed his disagreement, his superiors demoted him, a decision that was later reversed through a process involving an ethics complaint. 2 of these former employees also specifically stated that Boeing placed Spirit on probation because of this high number of defects. All of this agrees with statements that Boeing executives made separately about their experiences in dealing with Spirit over the years. One of them said that Boeing occasionally had to send armies of people over to Wichita to sort things out, only for those things to backslide again whenever those same armies returned back home again. Now, I'm sure it's obvious here that this is a really disturbing picture. The aircraft that lost that door plug was a 737 MAX-9, but in reality this doesn't seem to be a 737 MAX problem, unlike the issues that grounded the type back in 2019. We won't know for sure until the reports are out, but everything, including Boeing's CEO's own comments, points to the door blowout as a function of a mistake, something that was either missed or not done properly. And that, together with everything else that I've just explained, paints the picture of a serious culture problem, and in my view a really unnecessary one. Because as things stand today, Boeing and Spirit really need each other. Boeing can't simply find another one to make its aircraft in the same way that Spirit can't find another customer to give it the same workload for their 11,000 strong workforce in Wichita. On the 15th of January, Boeing addressed the problem to their employees by introducing several new steps to make sure that things like this blowout can't happen again. They included more quality inspections both at Boeing and at Spirit sites, team sessions on quality, more reviews of Spirit's work in Wichita by Boeing personnel, and allowing airline inspections at both Boeing's and Spirit sites. Boeing also announced that they had ordered an independent assessment of their quality management system by an outside party headed up by Admiral Kirkland H. Donald from the US Navy. Now, I'm sure that these are all great steps to take, but the really big question here is, will the public be reassured by this going forward? In a recent article in The Air Current, John Ostrower pointed out that fixing the issue who led up to the two 737 MAX crashes in 2018 and 19 was a quantitative process from Boeing's point of view. In other words, in that case, Boeing had to show the regulators and the general public all of the specific changes they made to the aircraft and the pilot training and how those fixes had solved the problem for good, which they also did. That's why the type was ultimately ungrounded. But solving culture issues is potentially much more complicated. And the problem is, of course, that the general public might perceive the problems as being the same. There's something wrong with the MAX. Even though, if an individual mistake and poor quality control was the cause to this, this could have potentially happened on another aircraft type that had just been delivered. And by the way, I am deliberately mentioning Boeing here, not Spirit, because this is, no matter how you turn it around, a Boeing problem. Spirit AeroSystems makes airplane parts. Boeing is the one who makes the airplanes. So if Spirit workers forget to do something and Spirit's quality control procedures then doesn't catch it before it leaves the building, well then Spirit will have to answer to Boeing about it, not to an airline or to the flying public. Answering to the airline, the FAA, and to the public is what Boeing now have to do. Unfortunately for Boeing, this event will also likely bring more delays to the certification of the remaining 737 MAX variants, the -7 and the -10. Boeing was hoping for an exemption in the certification of the 737-7 involving delays to the implementation of required changes to the engine anti-ice system. And this is obviously looking less likely now. Finally, in my previous video on Boeing and Spirit's problems with the 737 MAX, I mentioned the possibility of Boeing actually buying back Spirit, since on many occasions Boeing's own management have admitted that selling the Wichita operation was a terrible idea. But I ended that discussion by saying that as much as both Boeing and Spirit management might want to rejoin forces, Boeing simply doesn't have the money to do so. They have a lot of other pressing and costly worries before something like this could even be realistic, but could this latest episode actually change that? It is possible, however not very likely, that investors, regulators or even external factors could force Boeing to tackle its culture issues head-on by bringing Spirit back in under their own roof again. Now, let me know what you guys think about that in the comments below. I love hearing your perspectives, and if you want to have a deeper conversation about this with me directly, then consider joining my inner circle of Patreons. We have regular Zoom hangouts where everyone's questions are encouraged. You can also support the work that we do here by sending a super thanks using the $sign button below or buying some awesome merch. Have an absolutely fantastic day, and I'll see you next time. Bye bye.